Kia ora, and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. It's your boy, the Mr. Peptide Panther, here for another episode of Kiwi Sporting Goodness with the Wobbly Wildcard. On our agenda today, got a bit of various NRL topics, plenty of rugby league funk to keep us busy. We've got even more signings of Kiwi players in the Australian National Basketball League, so the basketball momentum rolls on, and we also have Welligtonn Phoenix coming into their playoff run and whatever Flying Kiwis mischief the wildcard wants to chuck up. If you love the Niche Cache and you enjoy the Niche Cast and you enjoy what we're doing here, support us straight up the guts on Patreon and/or sign up to our email newsletter, which we deliver every Monday and Friday. We are recording this Monday morning, and the bulk of my email on the Monday is setting the scene for the Caribbean Premier League. So that's just all the stats of the Kiwi players in the Premier League. So if you're listening to this and you haven't checked out the email newsletter, those are the type of goodies that we chuck in there. And the Wobbly Wildcard also adds his 2 cents. Any ideas what's coming in your email, Wobbly Wildcard?
No, we're recording before I've written it, so we'll call it a lucky dip. Mine's gonna be the Soup of the Day special or whatever.
Soup of the Day special. I've never really cared for Soup of the Day specials.
Neither. I think that's just how they get rid of the soup. Like, it's the only way people will order soup is if you give it a fancy title and give it away cheaper. Because who goes to a restaurant and orders soup, honestly? Like, you want to go and order something better than what you could cook in the microwave at home, surely.
Definitely. Unless you're getting like a soup that has, wizardry French cooking techniques with the Holy Trinity, the celery, the onions, whatever the fuck that shit is, the bone broths and all that. So yeah, you get a bit of a good soup. Yeah. But Wobbly Wildcard.
Or as a side dish or something, eh? Just like a little entree to dip your bread into or something. That's fine, but yeah, your main meal, yeah. No.
I'm more talking about the fine dining. You're not gonna dip your little bit of garlic bread into a full-on...
No, probably not at a
10
fancy
spice
establishment.
Bone broth kind of...
Leave crumbs all over the table, eh?
None of that's happening. Maybe in South Auckland that might happen, but maybe not in a 3 Michelin star restaurant in the back blocks of London. Kia ora, Wildcard, how are you?
Yeah, man, it's been a weird old week, eh? It's certainly one of those weeks where I'm glad I'm living outside of Auckland, that's for sure. Man, I'm just like, if people are counting down for this little lockdown 2.0, the mini lockdown or whatever, but I'm just like, I'm counting down just for the end of winter. It's like we get these couple days where there's been about 3 days in the last week, right? Where like between about 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., it's just been gorgeous, sunny, like perfect summer weather. And then by the end of it, it's freezing again. Like by 2 o'clock, it's freezing, it's raining and whatever. It's just these little glimpses and it's driving me crazy. But far be it from me to throw us into some weather chat to begin. How's lockdown 2.0 going in Auckland?
It's a weird one because it doesn't feel like any kind of lockdown's actually happening. And it is a better lockdown this time around because there is sport around the world happening. So like I'm in no way, shape or form am I mad about a lockdown when you've got like NBA finals happening, you've got NRL footy just rolling through, you can check on a bit of Lydia Ko here and there, you can pop over, we got the Caribbean Premier Leagues happening as well. So it's a very, very different lockdown this time around compared to the first lockdown. Even then, like, doesn't even feel like a lockdown in general until you venture out to like a supermarket or whatever, because like a lot of people are still working, there's still people out and about, like it's not that hardcore of a lockdown. So as long as we don't move into a existence where regular lockdowns are the norm, it's all good. No dramas.
Yeah, and for a shorter amount of time, and it's only level 3, I suppose it's probably a lot easier to go with the flow. And it does sound as well like a lot of businesses, for example, and just general workplaces have kind of learnt the lessons of the first lockdown and are like better prepared to be able to work through, like how they roster with people working from home. And like I saw a thing on the telly the other day about restaurants, like a lot more restaurants offering like collect options, pick up options and stuff like that, takeaway type things, just to keep themselves rolling through without the old contact. Like it seems pretty solid. Most people know what they're doing. And
further to that wildcard, I haven't ventured into the depths of South Auckland bakeries, but on the fringes of the South Auckland area, there is, like, immediately I noticed that a lot of the bakeries, like, immediately went into lockdown service. So you can't enter. You got the whole system at the door where you can... I'm not that desperate for a pie that I've gone through this. Like, I love a pie and all that, but, you know, I'm not that desperate for a fucking pie, so I'll chill on that and just wait till things are back to normal. So I haven't gone through the process. However, I've seen it, multiple spots, and it was just like, to further to your point, they seemed very adept and comfortable with the rules and how to still operate, still thrive in those rules, because they just chuck the table straight at the door, walk up, bit of pay wave, make your order, like a little mince and cheese or steak and cheese, a spring roll, sausage roll, one of those crappy ass sandwiches over there, and maybe a lamington as well. Cowabunga, job done, on your way with a big feed.
Yeah, there you go. You reminded me of a story that happened on Saturday. We got a fella in our football team who's got dark hair, but he's done the old, like, bleached on top with the I attribute it to the Dennis Rodman effect after lockdown, where you saw a bunch of this going on across sporting enterprises around the world. Many players going with the whatever, like the Dennis Rodman effect, where this fella's got the same thing going, and he got subbed on the weekend, and someone yells out from the other team, "Righto, who's marking mince and cheese over there?" That nickname's going to stick for that fella, unfortunately, although he actually quite rated it, so fair play. What was the other thing I was going to say? I can't remember. You step in.
Was he, not to get too racial here, but was he Pākehā, or was he... What ethnicity was the fellow with the bright hair?
I believe Pākehā.
So it's a weird thing, like, if you're a Pākehā dude, you it's harder for you to go to the bleached, like, there's two kind of levels to it. There's like the Israel Adesanya. I think he's actually got pink hair now, and he can go any color hair. It doesn't matter because of his darker skin complexion. Whereas if you get a white dude, very hard to pull off the bright color hair look. And then you've got someone like Patrick Tuipulotu, and a lot of the Polynesians, Māoris that are playing any sports that are happening right now, they got very into the coloured hair as well. So a bit of a sensitive topic to divide things racially here, but I mean, let's keep it real. Let's be honest here. It's very hard for a white dude, Pākehā Pālangi, to go deep into full hundies into coloured hair. And that's a blessing. That's a luxury that the Polynesian, Māori, and African, Fijian community in Aotearoa have.
Yeah, and it's not something to dodge the old racial component of that either, because you look at someone overseas like Paul Pogba, for example, and the amount of times he's been criticised for, like, getting a haircut, as if that has any effect on how he plays on the field. It's pretty hard not to see there being at least a little bit of something going on there. It's a bit like as to the old Pacquiao contingent not really being able to pull it off, it's a little bit like when you see a white dude with dreadlocks. It's like it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but there are certain assumptions people will make about your character, whether right or wrong. Makes me think of Jeremy Brocky, actually, back in the day. Good old Brox. He's actually without a club at the moment, Jeremy Brocky. I wouldn't rule out, I'll just chuck this out there, we might talk some flying Kiwis later, but there's not a whole lot going on. I wouldn't rule out a return to the A-League for Jeremy Brocky, to be honest. Like, if he signs anywhere, it'll either be in South Africa or in Australia.
I don't know what that says about, like, your... In the landscape we're in, with how amazing the flying Kiwis football exports are, having your two big options being South Africa and Australia, it's a bit weird.
Well, he's at the other end of his career as well. And, like, to be fair to Jeremy Brocky, he made a hell of a go of it in South Africa, which is not a weak league by any means. Like, it's one of the strongest ones in Africa. Kind of opened the door. And he has, for sure. Like, guys like Dan Morgan, maybe Andre De Jong as well, who are the two guys currently there. Non-Kiwi options, but who have come from New Zealand, like Emiliano Tade was there for a while, Mika Liafa was there for a while. Like, Jeremy Brocky legit probably did open the door for those guys. Michael Boxall was the teammate of Jeremy Brocky's for a while. Can't remember who went there first, but I think it was probably Brocky.
Radio Wildcard, we'll just drop some bits and bobs, just quick, hard and fast, newsy kind of stuff here. Speaking of Israel Adesanya, he is locked in. His UFC title fight against Paulo Costa got announced for September 26th, so just over a month away, although there is no location for that fight. Bit of discussion that maybe New Zealand could host the fight because there's fans, but there would be very difficult, borderline impossible to get foreign fighters just to go through all the hoops for those foreign fighters to come here. So you're probably going to get Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa either in United Arab Emirates or Las Vegas. That's cool, and that will undoubtedly feature other city kickboxing fighters. So guys like Brad Riddell, Kai Kara France, maybe Shane Young as well. Maybe Dan Hooker comes out of nowhere, but I'm not picking Dan Hooker to get on that card. But those other city kickboxing fighters, they should. We also have Lydia Ko. She finished tied for 12th at the Ladies Scottish Open in Scotland. And she had rounds of 70, 72, 67, 74. That third round of 67 put Lydia Ko in the top 5. And then that 74 in the final round saw her drop back to tied for 12th. However, it is back-to-back top 20 finishes for Lydia Ko, and her 3 results since the restart of the LPGA Tour are tied for 28th, tied for 2nd, and tied for 12th. So that is a very good LPGA restart for Lydia Ko, and she's got a hectic schedule. Like, the LPGA is absolutely going bonkers. They've got another tournament in Scotland, the Women's Open in Scotland, the next weekend coming, and then they're back for the Arkansas Championship on August 28th. And that's after that Arkansas Championship, I'll do my Lydia Ko mixtape for the month of August. And I'm actually quite excited because that's where I dive into, like, the stats with Lydia Ko, and I'm excited to compare her stats in this August restart period to how she was performing in 2019. So that's very interesting. And then we'll slide over to the NBA wildcard, where Steven Adams, his Oklahoma City Thunder, they have a series against the Houston Rockets starting tomorrow-ish? Maybe Wednesday.
I think Wednesday. Tuesday American time.
Yeah, Tuesday American time, Wednesday Aotearoa time, and that's a very exciting series there. Also, Sean Marks with the Brooklyn Nets, they are also in the playoffs, and they are facing the Toronto Raptors, which is tough matchup for them. Just give me a second here, Wildcard, and I'll drop why I find those two series interesting, and then you can chime in with your NBA knowledge. Just on Steven Adams, he played, going back to the start of the NBA restart, the bubble ball, his first 3 games, he played at least 27 minutes. Then he didn't play the next 3 games because basically what happened, any NBA team that had already sealed their playoff spot stopped giving a fuck. And a bunch of players didn't play. And then Steven Adams played 19 minutes, and then he played 6 minutes. So Steven Adams has basically been chilling, not playing a whole lot, because he doesn't need to. And that's cool, because what we have with the Oklahoma City Thunder is a very exciting team. They got Chris Paul, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Daniil Gallinari, Steven Adams doing his thing, and they're coming up against the Houston Rockets, who do have Russell Westbrook from OKC fame, and James Harden, but we also have a Houston Rockets team that tends to play a bit smaller, no big man, so that's going to present, I don't know what it's going to present, but it's going to be fucking interesting to watch Steven Adams, who is one of the best big men in the NBA. He is the Oklahoma City Thunder signature big man, and they are coming up against the Houston Rockets, who tend not to play with a typical center or a big man like Steven Adams. So that is a stylistic matchup which is very interesting and could provide Steven Adams with a great platform to dominate the Rockets, because they do have some big bodies to chuck in front of Steven Adams, but they don't have the like a center to go toe to toe with Steven Adams. And then for the Brooklyn Nets wildcard, the Toronto Raptors are one of the best organizations in the NBA, and they're still very good even without Kawhi Leonard. Maybe in different ways they've even got better without Kawhi Leonard. And the Brooklyn Nets, not only do they not have Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving playing in the bubble, they're also without a bunch of key contributors like Spencer Dinwiddie and other guys who couldn't take part in the bubble, and yet the Brooklyn Nets have still been very competitive. And so our connection to the Brooklyn Nets is with Sean Marks, and I'm interested in what the Brooklyn Nets do in the playoffs, because Sean Marks is in a weird old spot. Like, he's got to manage these big personalities of the Durants and Kyrie Irvings. I think he's got to suss out a coach as well, and he's dealing with a group who are low-key doing a great job for the Brooklyn Nets without their star players. So somehow Sean Marks has to juggle all that shit and make decisions, make moves after this bubble period is over. So if you're watching the Brooklyn Nets, think about how difficult the dudes playing for the Brooklyn Nets are making Sean Marks' job. Because if the Brooklyn Nets go really well in the NBA playoffs and somehow upset the Raptors or just be super competitive with the Raptors, Sean Marks has to manage everything that's happening, and there's so many different moving parts. Fascinating from my perspective there, Wildcard. Where do you want to jump in with that?
Well, I'll flow on directly from what you just said, because I'll chuck in, of those moving parts, I'll throw out 3 more specific ones for you. One is just the coaching thing, and I don't think it's, in fact, the whispers have been getting a little bit louder about this, that perhaps Jacques Vaughn, who's the caretaker until the end of the season, he's very much in contention to be the full-time head coach after the season as well. So he's not just there as a placeholder. He's legit like trying to get the absolute best out of this team, because he might have a very important job and that he's auditioning for at the same time. And it would have been quite easy otherwise to see the Brooklyn Nets just kind of like phone it in, and it's been pleasing to see how much they did. And I think some of their results have been affected by the fact that the Eastern Conference was sort of, even down to the seedings, was decided fairly early. So a few teams, few other teams, did do the whole rest and relaxing and chilling their way into the playoffs. So that did help Brooklyn on that front. I can't really imagine any way in which they can beat the Toronto Raptors, but certainly they can give them a more competitive game than series than people are expecting. And two specifics, the two other specifics to check out there. One is Jared Allen, who's a young center who they drafted, have brought through, really impressive guy, great shot blocker and fella who can play above the rim. He's got a fantastic afro, which is how you recognize him. Apparently also, a fascinating dude off the court as well. I remember reading that he builds his own computers from scratch. He's one of those fellas, so clearly a very intelligent fella as well. His situation has been treated kind of weirdly. He's been a little bit of the kind of just caught in the mix between the transition from the Nets being the lovely battlers to the Nets who can sign Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And as part of the package deal with Durant and Irving was also DeAndre Jordan, who comes in and is playing the same position as Jared Allen, who was looking like a guy who they could really use as a bit of a, no pun intended, centerpiece. Not a centerpiece of their roster, but just of the of their starting lineup at least. And Jared Allen for the most part held off Jordan, who was playing off the bench, but it was very, very notable that after Kenny Atkinson was fired, the first thing that happened was DeAndre Jordan was promoted to start the next two games before the pandemic came along and everything got postponed. So there's definitely a little bit of a dynamic there to be balanced, but DeAndre Jordan hasn't gone to the bubble, so Jared Allen's got a free run to show exactly why he should be starting, and he should, to be honest. He should be starting ahead of Jordan. But it's just a matter of how you balance things, because Jordan's also real good mates with Durant and Irving, so there's a little bit of trying to, not so much trying to please DeAndre Jordan as it is trying to please those other guys and giving them the team and that they feel comfortable with and the atmosphere they feel comfortable with, all these very difficult things that Sean Marks is having to work on. And the other one is, if you look at a team that has Durant and Irving in the starting lineup, there's your two top scorers right there. You don't have to think any deeper about that. But we don't see a lot of teams that can win championships on the back of two legit dudes. You generally need that third fella. The Cavs had Kevin Love. The Golden State Warriors had had more than two. But in the very least, you could say Klay Thompson, for example. You need that. You need that extra option for when those other two guys, say one of them's having a bad day, the other one's getting mauled by the top defender from the other team. Who are you passing the ball to under pressure? Well, Karis LeVert has had an outstanding little run in this NBA bubble. I think he was named in they did because the awards things were already voted for, they didn't count the overall end of season awards. They didn't count these bubble games as part of that. So they've given separate awards for the bubble, and Karis LeVert was, I think, second team All NBA bubble starting five, or however you want to call that. So just an example of how well he has played, and he is definitely auditioning to be that third option. Showing that they don't need to sign someone else to be in that role because he's good enough to step up. And again, I think he is good enough to step up. So definitely a lot to watch for the Brooklyn Nets, even in a series which doesn't look like there's too much upset potential. I don't see a lot of upset potential in any of these Eastern Conference series, for example. The Bucks are surely going to make short work of Orlando. Boston and Philly would have been an amazing series were Ben Simmons fit, but he's not, which means Boston are probably going to have a pretty distinct edge in that one. Indiana, and the Pacers and the Heat is definitely a competitive series, but 4 versus 5 is always competitive, especially in the bubble where you take out the home court advantage. So there's really nothing between those. You can't call it an upset. Either way, which is the exact same seeding that the Thunder are in actually in the West, where I think there is a lot more upset potential. I wouldn't consider it that. Probably you would have to say it's a bit of an upset if the Thunder knock the Rockets out, even though they had the exact same season record, just because the Rockets, the Thunder performed above themselves to get to this point. Rockets probably performed a little below themselves to fall to fourth. And I genuinely don't know which way that series would go. I still think the Rockets, for those reasons I just listed, Rockets got to be favorites, but the Thunder can certainly push them. And I hope it's one of those cases where the Rockets' lack of a big man allows Steven Adams to feast. There's also the very real possibility that it goes the other way around, where the Rockets just play too fast for Steven Adams to be able to stay on the court for long stretches, because it is a bit of a trend. In fact, it's not even a bit. It's a very significant trend in the last few years. So you don't see a lot of centers playing huge playoff minutes. Like, you got to kind of be, especially if you don't have a jump shot, if you can't offer that range of shooting, which Steven Adams doesn't, to be fair. Like, you don't see those guys getting huge minutes come playoff time, just because the intensity is quicker, and you're going to get, in a series, you get to go over and over against the same team. You get to really, pick the weaknesses, the mismatches, and really expose those. And 7-foot guys having to guard off switches against guards tends to be a pretty simple one to get to, a pretty simple mismatch to target. So, I don't know which way that'll go, because the Thunder have a strong team. They have Chris Paul, who can manipulate things, so it could go either way, to be honest.
Just on Steven Adams and his matchup against Houston, I just pulled up Steven Adams' basketball reference page, and I'm mindful of when Houston changed their lineup, so I don't know exactly when that was, but so since the new year, since 2020 started, which roughly coincided with Houston's change in strategy, Adams has played 2 games against Houston, just 2, and one of them he only played a minute 36, so that's null and void. There was another game back on the 9th of January where he played 24 minutes, and he only had 10 points wildcard. He had 15 points and 8 rebounds. I was looking at the wrong one. I was looking at Brooklyn, where he had 18 rebounds. So my whole point here is null and void. Because I was thinking, Steven Adams him getting 18 rebounds against a smaller Houston Rockets team is something that could forecast into this playoff series. But that wasn't the case, but it still applies. How do you view the matchup of this Houston Rockets team and how they play, and Steven Adams? Do you see Steven Adams getting more points, more rebounds, less game time because he can't keep up, as you alluded to? What's your gut feeling on Steven Adams coming up against a weird old Houston Rockets team?
Well, I think in playoff basketball, you have to be prepared for a center to play less. It's not so much about, I don't expect him to be able to maintain, and even then, throughout the season, he has generally played less anyway. There were, I think, if you're on his basketball reference, you can probably see this, but I think the last sort of 3 seasons, he was in the 32-minute to 30 to 32-minute range, and I think this season he's dropped more to around 28. I think they've just deliberately tried to spare him a few minutes, because he generally is kind of tired by the time it comes to playoffs, and it's not the reason why they haven't done well, and it's not the reason why, because remember, this team's been bounced in the first round, I think 4 years in a row. That's not the main reason why, but it is a way, one possible way which they could be a little bit better, a little bit more efficient. He's had a big rest. You even mentioned that he's even had a big rest within the bubble. He did have a leg injury. JaVale McGee fell on his leg against the Lakers, but he returned in that game to play. So the fact that he sat out 3 games afterwards for an injury which didn't even cause him to sit out an extended amount of time in the game he got injured suggests that it's way more precautionary than anything. And even after he came back, he didn't play the 4th quarter against, was it Utah? I can't remember who it was they played in that second to last game. And then the final game, I think he only played the first quarter. He only played about 6 minutes, which was definitely the Thunder not really, nothing to play for, nothing worth risking therefore. So he should be as well. It's a little bit of a worry, because I didn't think he looked as good as he had at the start of the bubble coming back that first game. It might just be a matter of just because he wasn't quite in rhythm rather than the fact that he might have been carrying the vestiges of an injury or whatever. So I'm always generally optimistic about those things because I think he's the kind of player who plays through pain anyway, and I don't think it necessarily hinders him. So yeah, it's the problem with trying to speculate on how he'd go in this matchup though is that it's not really up to him. Like, it's up to how the coach wants to target this game, and it's up to like whether players like Chris Paul and Gilgeous-Alexander can get the ball to Steven Adams in the paint, or whether he's just there to set screens and like give them little bursts of 4 to 6 minutes at a time, and then have a big rest and whatever. These things also evolve as playoff series go on. One thing that don't know if it massively affects this directly, but it could have a flow-on effect, is that Russell Westbrook is coming in injured, and he's definitely going to miss game 1, and there's a good chance he misses game 2, maybe even 3. I don't think he'll miss the whole series, but definitely at least going to miss the first game of the series, which, I mean, say what you want about the style of Russell Westbrook, but he has actually been really brilliant for the Houston Rockets just for the last, through this year. He took a little bit of a settling in period with the Rockets, and since then he's just been he's found such an amazing balance where he's only shooting a couple 3-pointers a game, and that's all he needs to do because he's a terrible 3-point shooter, but you just got to shoot 1 or 2 just to show that, just so that defenders know they need to take notice. It's the kind of thing people have been trying to hammer into Ben Simmons. Just like, you don't have to get them, just shoot a couple so that guys guard you a little bit closer and create a bit more room for others and gives you something to play off of. So Westbrook's found a great balance with that. He's also an extraordinary rebounder, which would be very funny watching Adams versus Westbrook. With all the narratives about how Westbrook would steal rebounds off of Adams, it's not so much that, it's more that Adams is the dude for the team rebound. He's out there to box out their top. This is his sort of personal mentality in those situations. He's just going to box out the biggest guy from the other team, and if the ball comes his way, he'll grab it. If it clears out room for someone else, one of the guards, for example, or a wing to come in and collect that rebound, then he doesn't care as long as the team gets the ball, which is nice. But it would be pretty funny watching Westbrook and Adams going head to head, especially because Adams is that much taller than him, but Westbrook can jump a mile off the ground. So it'd be that alone would be pretty hilarious, and it's one of many wrinkles that comes into this playoff series there and makes this arguably the most exciting of the lot of them. I do think there's one series which I'm more excited for than this one, but just the many ways in which the Houston Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder have just been connected over the last few years. And there was even a playoff series a few years ago, wasn't there, where these two met in the same situation and the Rockets triumphed. So that just makes this whole thing really exciting, man. This is definitely one of the ones to watch out for. The other one, though, that I think is slightly more exciting is that the LA Lakers haven't come in at, they haven't found peak form in the bubble. They've looked a little slow. They've looked, their offense has been kind of terrible, and I ascribe a lot of that to just the same, they came in with very little to play for. They wrapped up the number 1 seed early on, and I think they probably went through the motions a little bit. But they have to turn that around very quickly against, the form team in the NBA bubble right now, which is the Portland Trailblazers, and the way they've been going. And Portland aren't an amazing team. They're just have a habit of, they've just got a couple of them, arguably the most clutch guy in the NBA, and Damian Lillard, and a few other guys, in their play-in game, they beat Memphis. It was CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony who were hitting the big shots at the end there. So, just a team that has a lot of faults, and that's why they're always in close games. If they're a better team, they'd be blowing teams away. It wouldn't have to be so dramatic, but because of that, it makes them the most fun team to watch, and they're just on this huge roll, and that coming up against the Lakers team, you don't normally get 1 versus 8 where you think, well, I'll tell you what, but this might be, I don't know, this might be an interesting one. You got to feel for the Phoenix Suns, eh? I'll check out a comparison between where the Eastern Conference and the Western Conferences are at right now. The Washington Wizards came into the bubble with a chance to make they basically let anyone who had a chance to still make the playoffs in, and anyone who didn't, they didn't want them in there. For obvious reasons, just like strategical contingency reasons as much as anything. The Washington Wizards came in without Bradley Beal for one thing. There's automatically like take out their best player, and they're already the worst team competing in the bubble at that point. Well, there wasn't going to be much fun for them. They were terrible, so terrible that they've actually ended up finishing below the Charlotte Hornets, who weren't even there. So they finished below a team that wasn't invited to the bubble, whereas the Phoenix Suns on the other conference won every single game. They went 8-0 in the bubble and still not only didn't make the playoffs, but didn't even make the play-in, which makes you wonder kind of why they were there in the first place. If they could win every single game and still not make it, isn't that the whole point of how they decided who was going to turn up? But results didn't go their way. It was fun while it lasted, but there's a little bit of a difference between the two conferences there. I think the Brooklyn Nets, for example, got 7th seed. They did have a losing record. They were eight wins as well behind 6th. So that's more par for the course of what we've seen in recent times in the NBA, though, isn't it? But yeah. If you got anything else to say on that matter, or shall we move it on?
We went a bit deep into NBA.
We probably did.
It's too far in the weeds, but plenty of good stuff there. And either situation is fascinating. You got the Steven Adams against Houston Rockets, OKC being a low-key developing team under Chris Paul. That's very interesting. And then the whole Sean Marks situation is very interesting as well. So however you want it, whether you want the dude in the office trying to manage everything, or if you want big old Kiwi Steve on the fucking court, it's a beautiful thing. NBA playoffs
like the Taco
in the bubble.
ad says, why not both?
Why not a bit? You can't do both. So, like you can't physically be on the court and in the office. That's just too tricky. But we can enjoy both.
Well, as a fan, we can enjoy them both, though.
We can do that. We can do that. Bit of NRL here, wildcard, where we had 2 more debutants. We got Christian Tuipulotu debuted on the wing for the Roosters, scored a try. It was a bit of a tricky debut, though, for Christian Tuipulotu, considering he was up against Suliasi Vunivalu, who is a menace, and he got peppered with a lot of kicks. Jerome Hughes for the Melbourne Storm was very good. And the Storm were very good, and they defeated the Roosters. But we did get Christian Tuipulotu debuting. I didn't preview it in the encyclopedia because he was only named on an extended bench, and then he got called up to make his debut. So for some background information on Tuipulotu, he was an Ellerslie Eagles junior, attended St. Paul's College, and he was in the Warriors system. However, he was also heavily recruited by pretty much every team who deals with an oval ball. Like, he spent time with the Auckland Blues development stuff. The Roosters flew him down to Queenstown to meet the Roosters players in their like preseason training. So he was heavily recruited. And again, that's why it's good that guys like Phil Gould and Peter O'Sullivan are coming to the Warriors to help them keep players like Christian Tuipulotu at the Warriors. Because if the Roosters come calling, yeah, I'm going to the Roosters. The Roosters are fantastic. They look after you in every which way. And that's why the Roosters have Pawasa Fa'amasili, who's a Glenora Bears junior in Auckland. Satili Tuponuia, who's a Mara Saints junior in Auckland. Joseph Manu, Tokoroa High School, gun, went to the Roosters. The Roosters have built up that street cred, they've built up that reputation, and that's how they recruit a lot of their players from Aotearoa, and Christian Tuipulotu is just the latest from their long list of players. Interesting. There's plenty of interesting notes because Christian Tuipulotu and Jordan Riki, who debuted for the Broncos, are 2 of the most decorated prospects I've covered over the past 5 to 10 years. Made all the rep teams in New Zealand, won awards with New Zealand Rugby League as well. And so there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of like this player being in the same under 16 New Zealand Rugby League team is this player and stuff like that. So I try and write about that stuff as much as possible. The one I chucked up in my Monday morning dummy half was that if we go back to the 2017 National Secondary Schools Tournament team, you had Christian Tuipulotu playing for St. Paul's, and you had Jordan Riki playing for St. Thomas, which is a school in Christchurch. So that's just cool, train spotting stuff that we like to serve up. Another thing about Tuipulotu, when he was coming through the Warriors system, he was kind of more of a second rower, edge forward / center. And then once he got into that Roosters system, he predominantly turned into being a winger. So it was good to see what I suspect is a lot of work done, showcased in his debut, because he scored a try that standard NRL wingers score these days. However, Tuipulotu doesn't really have the pedigree as a winger. So the diving try, like, you got to learn that stuff. You got to pick that up if you're not really playing wing as a junior, which, considering Tuipulotu's a big lump of a lad, I don't think he would have been playing wing as a junior. He would have been playing like edge forward or in the forward pack in the middle. So good for him. And Jordan Riki, tough debut for him because he's part of a pretty shit Broncos team. But he got 25 minutes off the bench, and the notable thing here was that he played left edge. So Jordan Riki can play through the middle, and he can play on an edge. He replaced Ben Teo on the left edge for the Broncos, and Jordan Riki is an absolute monster. He is an absolute monster. He played for he's a 2-year junior Kiwi, 2018, and then 2019, which is crazy when you think that 2018 junior Kiwis were under 20s, and then 2019 junior Kiwis was under 19. So Jordan Riki stayed in the junior Kiwis despite their age going down a year, and that's pretty good. And he made his debut for the Māori All-Stars earlier this year as well. So he's a very good young forward and made his debut for the Broncos. However, the Broncos forward packers, every time I check the Kiwi NRL stats wildcard, the Broncos, their opponent forwards have massive performances. This week it was the Canberra Raiders forward pack, and Joseph Tapine and Corey Harawira-Naera, for example, I go to the stats and I check for Kiwi players. So I don't know about the other Raiders forward pack, but forwards. However, Joseph Tapine, 48 minutes, 15 runs for 175 meters, and that's 11.66 meters per run. Wow. 3 offloads as well. Corey Harawira-Naera in his second or third game for the Raiders, playing through the middle, which is also interesting, considering Harawira-Naera is one of these. He started off as an edge forward, but there's a lot of Kiwi NRL forwards doing the edge and middle. So they're very versatile, mobility, power, that kind of stuff. Harawira-Naera had 35 minutes, 12 runs for 173 meters, 14.41 meters per run. Via a couple line breaks, 4 tackle busts, and an offload as well. So my point there, Wildcard, is every week I see Kiwi NRL forwards dominating, absolutely steamrolling, getting their stats up, getting the juice against the Broncos forward pack. And that Broncos forward pack, plenty of good young forwards, but they just make it easy for our Kiwi NRL monsters to get big numbers. So shout out the fancied Broncos forward pack who get steamrolled by everyone else.
Yeah, the Broncos are a mess, aren't they? Like, that's just a sad situation, especially because of all the, like, I guess when you're owned by, largely by a media organization, you create a lot of stories in sort of a beneficial way when you're doing well, and it's a nice sort of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back situation going on, and then when suddenly things are looking as terrible as I can ever remember them being for the Brisbane Broncos, and they're getting rolled by opposition forward packs every single week, the pressure is even greater. It's a bit of a sad one from top to tail there for the Broncos, but so it goes. I think maybe a little bit of perspective is healthy in that those matters, and that like doesn't matter how big of a club you are, everyone goes through their ups and downs and little rebuilding phases and whatever, and the Warriors have been in one for about 10 years, so Broncos probably won't last because eventually they'll chuck some big money at someone, whatever, so it goes. But I can't say I despise watching them in that kind of situation. I kind of enjoy it, to be honest, because it's a nice reminder of those ups and downs, and it's also just funny when it's the Broncos. Maybe I'm being cruel.
So the thing with Jordan Riki there is that there's two routes for Jordan Riki. He could either be eased into NRL footy on the edge, playing 25, 35 minutes on an edge because the Broncos are getting rolled most weeks and you don't want to chuck a young player maybe into that fire. On the other hand, given Jordan Riki's like pedigree and the intensity that he plays with, like that dude goes hard, maybe he can help the Broncos through the middle because he has played like seasons at in the middle in reserve grade up in Queensland as well. So plenty to watch out for with Jordan Riki.
Well, that's the thing, eh? You can either be you probably as a young player, you probably from a development perspective, a team would probably prefer the ease them in on the edge kind of thing, give them a simple role kind of thing, but you also kind of prefer the player who demands, like, nah, let me, like, sink or swim and let me, like, go out there and take an opportunity to potentially be a bit of a hero. Like, there's just, from a development perspective, you maybe want you maybe want to ease them in, but you also want the mentality who wants that role, so see how it goes, I suppose.
Most clubs do the opposite, though.
Do they?
A lot of the better clubs ease players in through the middle. So I think like Satili Tupunuia, he's starting on the edge now that Boyd Cordner's missed a few weeks for the Roosters, but he got his opportunities through the middle for the Roosters. Marata Niokori is another one. Can play edge, can play middle. Started off with the Eels coming off the bench through the middle. So I think it's a bit easier if you've got the size, power, footwork to play through the middle. So that's why they just like impact roll through the middle, settle into NRL footy. Very similar to what teams do with their like young halves. Something I've noticed is that young halves coming in tend to get like bench hooker roles because maybe to toughen them up a bit and because they're quite skillful, so just having another skillful player on the field. But I also think it's a lot easier, not a lot easier, but it is a bit easier to play through the middle because it's easier to defend as a middle forward. If you're playing in the middle, then defending on the edge would be a nightmare. You've got shape coming at you. You've got your opposition half trying to isolate you. So if you're a young forward getting big minutes on an edge, you're going to be targeted every single week. So I think it is a little bit easier to defend in the middle. But we're trying to make sense of the Broncos where there is not much sense. So I've got no idea what's going to happen there. But just in forecasting Jordan Riki, he can play middle, he can play edge. And I think I'm just more interested in what he might do in the middle at the Broncos. Otherwise, he'll be rampant out on an edge with the Broncos. They do add, so on the back of the Phil Gould news with the New Zealand Warriors and my connecting of the dots there, I wrote a bit more about it in last Friday's email and covered it in the podcast, covered it in last week's Monday Morning Dummy Half, and so on and so forth. A constant is like another layer to New Zealand Rugby League's strength is the amount of debutants this year. So this week we had Tuipulotu and Jordan Riki, former Rooster Asu Kipa'oa who was actually he was the next winger at the Roosters in line prior to Sonny Bill getting signed. And then Kepaoa left to go to the West Tigers as part of that situation, and that opened the way for Tuipulotu to come in. So Tuipulotu and Kepaoa were part of the same Roosters team, same Roosters squad. Asu Kepaoa made his debut for the Tigers. You had the Cowboys have had 3 debutants from Aotearoa. Connolly Lamelu playing at centre. Emre Pere coming off the bench as a forward. Dejan Arce from Christchurch. He played 1 game in the halves. It's off the top of my head. And so you've got you've got plenty of debutants in the NRL, let alone other young players. Like you've got Stafford Toas getting on the wing for the Newcastle Knights. You've got Jackson Ferris made his debut for the Sharks a few weeks ago. Jackson Paulo is playing on the wing for the Rabbitohs pretty much every week. And Eliasa Katoa playing for the Warriors. So not only is there the debutants, there's the young players. Braden Hamlin-Uele's having a great impact on the Cronulla Sharks. Maratini Akori, Dylan Brown. Those type of characters are all playing really good footy, and that is to me, that is part of the picture that we are working with regards to New Zealand Rugby League. These are the foundations that will now be built upon. And I think it is a very exciting time for New Zealand Rugby League and everyone invested in it to have such an influence at every level. Like you got the big dogs, the established Aotearoa Kiwis, or the likes of Jason Taumalolo, Martin Tapau, those Kiwi NRL players. You've got the top tier. You've got the guys battling on the fringes of international squads that they're eligible for. You've got a lot of young players, younger players, the guys who debuted last year and have been doing it, or the year before, guys like Niokore, guys like Dylan Brown, folks like Nelson Asafa-Solomona, even he's in the top tier, Stafford Toa, those type of characters. And then you've got even younger with a shitload of debutants this year. So it's every level there is talent, and every level there are good numbers. So we're looking for quality and quantity, and it's all there. It's all there. I was a bit worried considering there's no reserve grade footy or under 20s footy this year. So a lot of I could see that the depth of Kiwi NRL talent was there, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more at various NRL clubs. Like I know the Cowboys have 2, 3, 4 more Kiwi NRL juniors. A lot of these clubs have Kiwi prospects already in their system. So I'm predicting that this will just keep on flowing, keep on moving. But I was a bit cautious because there is no reserve grade footy. There is no junior footy to keep them invested, to keep them engaged. However, a lot of injuries and suspension are opening doors now, and we're seeing that talent flood into the NRL. So it's fascinating times, wildcard, to be whether you're like a Samoan fan or a Tongan fan or just a Kiwis fan, however you want to, whatever silo you want to be in, it all goes back to like rugby league in Aotearoa, and it's easily the most the highest quality, most quantity as well. Fascinating, amazing, beautiful.
It really is fascinating, and what's even more fascinating is that the same things that you just said there about the state of rugby league in Aotearoa, very similar things that we've said about the state of football is what in this country as well. Like the quality of players coming through, how stacked the national team is going to look, and maybe not quite yet, but certainly in a year or two, the All Whites are probably almost there. It's male and female though when it comes to football. The footy ferns are, more professional female football players out of this country than ever before as well. And we're going to talk about basketball in a second, which you could probably say very similar things about that too, and the numbers of professional players coming through and how strong the national team looks like it's building towards being, and having Steven Adams in the NBA full time is just a luxury that New Zealand basketball has never had in the past. And we generally see the more optimistic side of things on this podcast anyway, Nishkash in general, but which is like an ideological thing for us, but it's also like, these are facts. This isn't just us like looking at all these different sports and saying, yeah, they're in a great position because we say they are, because we're just trying to see the sunny side. Like, this is undoubtable, like the quantity and the quality. I don't know. It's just making me think whether there's a link between that fact that like Kiwi sport in general just seems to be growing to new heights, or like where is it coming from? I don't know. But we're just in a bit of a position where a number of sports seem to be taking advantage of whatever this moment of time is, because it's there, like in a lot of different areas, a lot of different sports. When you look for it, it's there.
I'll swing it back to a couple of players to watch out for, but you did get me. That is a very interesting idea here that we're working through. I think it's just a timing thing with generations. Like, when I started writing about rugby league, I did so specifically because I could see that there was going to be growth. And the way I put it is I invested in rugby league. That's the gamble I took, is I put my effort into rugby league as opposed to rugby union. Not only because of like the saturation in Aotearoa of rugby union, but also I could see how things were going to look for rugby league. Like, you could already see the signs that, like, these are the early days where NRL scouts are showing up to intermediate rugby tournaments, rugby union tournaments, that NRL scouts are recruiting from first 15. Like, all of that stuff was happening in the background, and through having my ear to the street or my ear to the paddock, I could assess what was happening, and that helped me lean into rugby league. But I believe that's part of just a generation of Kiwi kids that, just as we've discussed, like, this is kind of goes back to ideas we've touched on nearly every week, so we don't need to go deep into this to repeat ourselves, but I think there's just a generation of kids who have grown up exposed to so many different sports. Like, there's kids who grow up watching the NRL as much as they do Super Rugby, let alone the kids who now have access to endless NBA stuff on the internet. They have access to all the world of football, and that exposure is just now seeping into how young Kiwis are. And so I don't think it's a surprise that the talent is now coming through at this time. And
no, 100%, that's a major factor.
Yeah, and it's just like we're seeing it across various sports. Like, it's basically rugby's doing fine. This isn't to be negative about rugby, or even going back to the idea of maybe basketball having an impact on the future of netball. It's not to be negative towards rugby and netball, because they're doing well, like they're holding it together, but they just don't have the growth that other sports are happening. They're still holding it down. I'm sure they're all doing fine financially and playing numbers and stuff like that. But now there's just so many more options through the exposure to different sports that the talent is being shared around different sports, and you're getting, like, go to the Major League Soccer, the restart tournament there. Bill Tuiloma won that tournament. Now, I'm fairly confident Bill Tuiloma's Samoan, and I'm fairly confident that Bill Tuiloma is the first Samoan to win a MLS trophy. And that puts into context an idea about people from different backgrounds in Aotearoa being exposed to different sports, and that opens them up to take different avenues. Whereas before, maybe certain backgrounds, certain cultures, certain ethnicities, or even if you're a Pākehā dude on a farm in New Zealand, you're better suited to rugby. Whereas now that exposure, we're seeing different cultures playing different sports and having a fantastic worldwide impact. Like you can look through, like I brought it up with the basketball league in New Zealand, the NBL in New Zealand. I'm watching those basketball games and shit, like it's a multicultural basketball court. And then you've got all various ethnicities playing rugby league, various ethnicities playing football and contributing at a high level. And that just goes back to kids in Aotearoa, whatever culture, whatever ethnicity they are now exposed to so many different sports, and the natural talents that usually got filtered into one or two sports are now being opened up to play any sport you want to play, whatever feels naturally attractive to you.
I did have to just check up on that first Samoan to win an MLS trophy kind of thing, because there was one fella that immediately sprung to mind, which is Tim Cahill, but I did check. He did win a Supporters Shield with New York Red Bulls, but he never won an MLS championship. Also, this isn't an MLS championship. Technically, it's the, I don't know, they called it the COVID Cup unofficially. The MLS's back tournament, whatever, but it's still a major trophy. So, yeah, that's probably fair. And I'll also throw out there that the most prominent New Zealander in the MLS is Michael Boxall, who's also half Samoan.
Boom. Even better. Holy cow. Samoan takeover of the MLS. I'll just finish up the rugby league bit here, wildcard, hard and fast. A couple players to watch out for over the next few weeks. Saliva Havili is starting at hooker for the Canberra Raiders in place of Josh Hodgson, and he's doing a bloody good job. He's started his last 5 games at hooker for the Raiders, and the Raiders are 4-1. That's 4 wins, 1 loss, which is amazing. Great work. And another little stat here about Saliva Havili, Manuriwa Marlins Jr., is he has missed 1 tackle in that 5-game stretch. Now, Josh, in the first 9 games, Josh Hodgson missed 52 tackles and averaged 5.7 missed tackles per game. Starting at hooker, Saliva Havili has only missed 1 tackle in his last 5 games. So, really good work from Saliva Havili defensively and just doing his job at hooker. So watch out for Saliva Havili. I mentioned Joseph Tapani and Harawira Naira as well. Canberra Raiders are cooking, and there's plenty of Kiwi NRL contributions. Obviously, Shans Nickel-Clockstad as well, doing great work. Also, Melbourne Storm, without Cameron Smith. Brandon Smith played 67 minutes and then 63 minutes starting at hooker. And he's gone back-to-back in those games. No missed tackles. Chuck in Jerome Hughes, doing a great job in the halves for the Melbourne Storm. He's 3rd in try assists, which is really good for Jerome Hughes and the Melbourne Storm to have a player like Hughes being a major factor in try assists. But you got Brandon Smith covering the starting hooker role in the absence of Cameron Smith. And you've got Hughes doing a lot of the playmaking without Cameron Munster. So there are a bunch of other factors, like Canberra Raiders have John Bateman back. Melbourne Storm are based on a system, so it's hard to pinpoint to one player. But just I'll chuck it out there. If you're NRL fan, Kiwi NRL fan, pay attention to what the Canberra Raiders are doing and the role that Saliva Havili's playing in that, starting at hooker, and then pay attention to the Melbourne Storm and the playmaking of Brandon Smith, the playmaking of Jerome Hughes, because I would suggest that those players are having a major impact, major influence on the success of either team. I will finish the rugby league bit here, wildcard, with a simple question. NZ Warriors, Aotearoa Warriors, been pretty good of late. I might actually write about what are some things that are happening in their, not dominant, like they haven't won, they're 2-3 in their last 5 games, but they are passing the eye test as far as good footy playing is going. We know the news around the Warriors wildcard off the field. What are you doing with New Zealand Warriors stocks? Are you buying? I doubt you're going to be selling. Maybe you will sell some Warriors stocks, but I'd suggest you'd lose a bit of money there. Are you holding the stocks? Are you buying more stocks because you're fizzing with Warriors excitement? Are you just going to wait and see what they're doing? Buy or sell or hold? New Zealand Warriors stocks wildcard.
Right. Well, I mean, the rule of the whole stock game is that you buy low and sell high, right? So certainly not in a selling situation because they wouldn't be worth enough. But I do think it's a point that's been made. I think, I can't remember if it might have even been someone like Nathan Brown who said it. But anyway, it's a thought that people could easily have had independently anyway, because you only have to look at this team to think, like, there's some really quality players there, and they're battling pretty hard at the moment. When you think about it, they're not that far away from the top 8. Like, if they get consistency and if they get a couple fellas who can push them over the top, they're, 1 or 2 signings, and this is a team that should be making the top 8 most seasons. And if you get a couple more on top of that, potentially they're a team that could push top 4. I think that getting into the top 8 is a lot easier than getting into the top 4 comparatively, even over the same amount of distances. I think just that top 4 is more gritty, and like the teams there's less rotation anyway. But if you think of that, like, think of the Warriors in that perspective as a team who aren't as far away as their reputation perhaps makes them seem like they are, well then there's a team whose reputation in reality, there's a difference between that, which means it's probably time to buy, to be honest. If they're rated lower than they are, then they wouldn't even need to perform that much better in order for you to make a gain on your stocks, right? In the very least, they could, I could understand there being a situation where you just say, I'm just going to hold on and see what happens. Like, now is not the time to sell the stocks. Maybe I just need to wait and see things see the ship get rightened over the next season or 2 and then see what happens. But I'm not sure I have any stocks to hold on to, so I probably need to buy some new ones, I think. Not a lot, because I'm not going to put, I'm very much in the believe it when I see it kind of mode, but I do think that they're heading in the right direction in a way where maybe, I don't know, I just think the foundations were quite nicely set. I don't think they're a team that's bottomed out or anything, or that would need to bottom out. I think they're just a team that needs a push to get over the top to the next level, and maybe, at least they're acknowledging that, right? So whether they've got the right coach, I think they've got a coach who can certainly do that for them, and therefore they're probably, yeah. The problem is I keep second guessing myself because I don't want to be like, yeah, they're definitely hitting on the upwards. But I mean, I think, I think I'll buy conservatively will be the answer. I think I've talked myself around to that point. I'll buy a few stocks, hold on to. I'm not going for the big victory here. Like, I'm not gonna look to sell in a few years and have enough profits to retire on. I'll just go for the gentle little boost to the lifestyle rather than the complete game-changing stock market triumph. I'm just gonna buy conservatively.
On the basis that I've got a lot of stock invested in, Melbourne Storm and Sydney Roosters stock. I'll dabble in a bit of Warriors stock as well and buy some more Warriors stock. But I think it's the type of thing.
You could just buy it with the profits from those teams.
Yeah, it's something that
enough for you.
It's something that you do on top of your foundations. Like you've got your foundation pipelines, and then you dabble a little bit of gambling. And of all the teams, I'd be gambling on the Warriors because I think they've got the most scope for growth. Radio
Not
Wild
the
Kid.
post-Mary Dragon stock?
Ooh. No.
Yeah,
The thing about the Warriors that I think that I am thinking about here, Wildcard, just quietly, is like, you've still got Lydia Ko, Bunty Afoa, Ignatius Parsi. They're still with the Warriors, so you can look at the Warriors forward pack now. Yeah, cool. Sign Kane Evans. He's a good NRL contributor. And then on top of that, you've got Bunty Afoa, Ignatius Parsi, Lydia Ko, who haven't really played much this year. So just keep stuff like that in the back of your mind as we move forward. Radio Wildcard, we'll wrap it up with some signing news in the Australian NBL, and then we'll get you lowdown on the Welligtonn Phoenix and any Flying Kiwi stuff to finish. Australian NBL, I think we had Jordan Ngatai joining Jared Kenny in signing with Cairns Taipans. They were both Otago Nuggets that won the most recent NBL championship. Now they're going to be teaming up for Cairns. We also had Tane Murray signing a development deal, I think it was, with the New Zealand Breakers. And those were offset by youngster Yanni Wetzel opting out of his deal. I personally am probably most interested in Jordan Ngatai going to Cairns and teaming up with Jared Kenny, and especially now that I know a wee bit more about those guys and the basketball landscape. That's where my immediate gaze goes. So touch on that, but also what's significant about less so Yanni Wetzel opting out, because we both believe he's just looking for a European deal, or he's got a European deal locked in, but more so the Tane Murray development deal with the Breakers, considering that you've been a bit anti-Breakers on their anti-New Zealand young player way of operating.
Yep, and I hold that to be a justified position as well. And the Breakers have been one thing about this, the I don't even want to call it the new ownership anymore. Like they've had 2.5 years or whatever it is. So one thing about this Breakers ownership is that they're very good at saying the right things. So like when there was criticism this time a year ago, when you had assistant coaches leaving and a few notable New Zealand players like Shea Lee requesting to leave and things like that. Dylan Boucher, probably the biggest bombshell of the lot of them. Like a lot of established and beloved Kiwi basketballing presences all deciding they didn't want to be a part of this franchise moving forward for whatever reason. There was always talk about how the Breakers are committed, like these are just individual circumstances, take them in isolation and they all make sense. Breakers are still very committed to New Zealand basketball, blah, blah, blah. It's like the right words are never far away. Like the Breakers are good at their communications for the most part, with these kind of things. Well, to be honest, that's why I quickly grew fatigued to that kind of thing. It's like, oh, okay, you can say the right things, but let's do the right things is a whole lot more important. Let's actually see the actions rather than just the words. And last season of a potential, I thought it was 3, but it's 4 development players you're allowed to have. Out of a potential 4, they had the minimum of 1, and it was Terry Lee, who's not even a New Zealand or Australian player. So he was there on a slight, as a development player, but sort of like a combination between development player and a next star. A next star, maybe. So he's still there. He's got a 3-year deal. They've also added that this fella, Kyron Galloway, who's an Australian youngster, as a development player. And now they've signed Tane Murray. So they didn't have a single of, it used to be just a default the Breakers would pick, at least 3 up-and-coming, rising, teenage kind of stars for potentially post-college, pre-college guys for a year of development basketball. Like Ty Webster did that back in the day, if I remember. There's a few of them, like, and then that would just be a presence. And then if they happen to be in a home game, they're up 20 with 2 minutes to go, you might get to see a few of these guys out in the court. They didn't do that at all last year, but getting Taine Murray in is a nice little boost. Like, it's a nice little boost to that narrative they've been saying about this kind of stuff. Here's an example of some doing, so it's what we want to see. It's beautiful little signing. Taine Murray's real interesting too, because he's definitely going to go to college in the States, and from what he's been saying, he's narrowed his choice down to 3 schools. I think it's Maryland, where there's a nice sort of stylistic fit for him, and also he has some connections through Kevin Braswell, who coached the Huskies. Stanford, which is the academic choice, obviously. Taine Murray being a nice, well-rounded human being who wants the best of from his life, both on and off the court. And then the third one is Virginia, who are sort of like the prestige option because they're recent champions. They won it with Jack Salt when Jack Salt was playing as well, so it's a Kiwi connection. Plus, Kirk Penny's been doing some coaching with them. I think that's true over the last year or two, so there's a couple extra connections there. But whichever way he goes, he'll be a recruit next year because he finishes high school this year. So that means that in that time frame between going to college in the States and basically like the end of the last the end of the NBL showdown season, he's now filled that entire gap up with Breakers basketball. So something like he's found himself something where like he's obviously only going to be there the 1 year as a development player. He might get some good minutes, he might not. Depends. Like they're going to be a pretty deep roster, this Breakers team. So there might not be a huge amount of minutes to go around, but certainly throughout that time he will be playing. He will be training with these guys. He'll be getting a high level of basketball education. And like, remember, this is a team that backed themselves as well last year to take a guy preparing for the NBA and RJ Hampton, a point guard. Taine Murray isn't really a point guard; he's more a shooting guard, but still, like a young guard. Like they've obviously backed themselves as a bit of a team for development of these like young players, and it just all makes sense. It just all the pieces fit together nicely, so it's a cool one to see. What else do we have there? Jordan Knott, I agree, is probably the most interesting in terms of actual like NBL on the court, something to watch for kind of basketball. First of all, how cool is it that he's going to reunite in Cairns with Jared Kenny, and you have to, like, after they were the backcourt that led the Otago Nuggets to the NBL championship this season. Keeping the old gang together there, I kind of suspect maybe you'd have to think Jared Kenny must have had a little bit of a say in that as well. Like maybe he recommended him, or maybe just the coaches seeing how well he played with Kenny made them think, okay, well, you tell you what, maybe we're onto something a little bit here. So it's really exciting from that aspect. It's also really cool because I wasn't sure this was going to happen for Jordan Nartsai. Like, he's good enough to get into this situation. It's just that after, like, he never really got a whole lot of opportunities for the Breakers, limited minutes throughout his time there as a fully rostered player. So I kind of thought maybe he just was going to, just fall off the end of the wagon there without really getting a chance. So this is awesome for him. Like, it's an incredible opportunity, and it gives him the chance to be like, I think the best example of this in recent years is Ruben Tarangi, who is a guy who was decent, but not quite decent enough to where he booked himself like extended Breakers tenure, but then went overseas to he went to Brisbane. He started, I think he was at Brisbane the whole time, and was just a breakout player for them. I think he won 6th Man of the Year, didn't he, at one point, or one of those awards, or might have been Most Improved. And he's just finished up at Brisbane and signed with Southeast Melbourne, which is actually where Yanni Wetzel was going to play alongside him. But Yanni Wetzel, yeah, I think it sounds. I mean, I heard Germany. I don't think it's been announced anywhere yet as of recording where he's going, but it seems pretty obvious, yeah, that he's got a deal already lined up in In Europe, he had an out clause from the start, which just shows you like what a talent this guy is, because he's obviously been playing in the States at college level for the last few years, so we haven't really seen him in New Zealand, so it might be sort of slept on just what a level of talent he is, and this is proof of that. Like, he's got people scrapping over his signature all around the world. When you're a player that good, and I suspect the money will be significantly higher in Europe as well. You keep your options open, and I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere that he kind of had to decide this weekend, like that was the expiration of that out clause, so he had to decide one way or another which one of these contracts do I take up. Means we don't get to see him in the NBL, which is a little bit of a shame, because he was going to be a player who had the potential to be, a really effective player, a really fun watch as well, and an exciting one from a Kiwi basketball perspective. But I will throw this out there. It's not a bad thing whatsoever to have another guy playing at a decent level professionally in Europe. Certainly not a bad thing. And it does leave Southeast Melbourne scrambling a little bit to find a player in his position. You think of the skills that Wetzel offers. He's maybe a little bit undersized as a centre, but he would have played as centre, and he as a centre who could shoot very well, or at the very least, they might be signing. I think they might be signing an import centre actually. So, he'd be a big man who'd maybe playing those power forward minutes. I'm not actually sure entirely. It's all speculation pre-season anyway, especially when the rosters aren't fit. But, if you think of a guy who's out there who could play power forward, maybe a bit of center, who can shoot, it's got to be a local player if they're going to sign their last import thing as a rebounding big man. I'm just going to chuck out the name Tom Verdanovic there. I don't know if that's the way they would be leaning. I don't know if that's how they would be thinking towards these things. But as far as I'm concerned, the rule should be if you lose a Kiwi, you got to sign a Kiwi. So Tom Verdanovic is the MVP of the most recent NBL in this country. Surely worthy of an opportunity elsewhere, and he's in exactly the same situation as Jordan Riki, where he's just been released by the Breakers. Didn't do quite enough to justify another contract there, but who would be in that same position where if you give him an opportunity a little bit outside his comfort zone, a different Aussie NBL side, could well make that big rise. And we already saw a big rise from him, and suddenly being this gun 3-point shooter for Manawatu. So I'm just going to throw that one out there. I don't have any intel. I haven't heard any rumors. I don't necessarily think that'll happen, but that's certainly what I want to see happen.
There's a slight difference with you and what you think and what you want to happen at the Aotearoa Breakers.
Definitely, yes.
We'll finish here, Wildcard.
Well, we already talked about Bull Tialoma. He's the head honcho this week, so we can leave that there and just do Phoenix.
Shout out the Usos in the MLS. Big things popping for Samoan Kiwis in the USA soccer landscape. Rightio, Welligtonn Phoenix. I think they had a 3-0 loss in their wildcard to the Newcastle Jets, which is a bit of a bummer considering their last three results. 1-0 loss to Western Sydney, 1-1 draw with the Brisbane Roar, and then a 3-0 loss to the Welligtonn Phoenix. Before getting into some logistics of how shit might end up, how are you feeling about the Welligtonn Phoenix on the back of those last three results heading into, finals football?
I'd go further back and say all six results since the restart. I mean, even the game that they won against Perth, they were they were really good for an hour, and then they were scrambling just to hold on for a 2-1 victory in the end there. So, I mean, that was the only game they've won since the restart. I think the only team with fewer points per game since the restart has been the Melbourne Victory, who were pretty much out of it already and had nothing to play for. Phoenix came in thinking they could lock up second place. So, it's a big concern on that front. I think, I mean, they haven't played badly. Like, they haven't played as bad as that suggests. They're yet to put together a full 90 minutes of good performance, and they're also still really struggling with this whole aspect of, like, how do we put the little round thing into the big net shape thing between the posty things. Like, how do we do that? That's still a bit of a riddle they haven't really solved, and it's just got a whole lot harder because Gary Hooper's been ruled out for the playoffs with that hamstring injury he picked up a couple games ago. There goes your top scorer and your best finisher in the squad. That is a concern. They're also without Tim Payne for the rest of the season, who's flying back to New Zealand, also injured, hasn't played since restart. And I had a stat in the last Welly Knicks title quest write-up where it said, where are we? When Tim Payne starts, the Phoenix have taken 33 points from 15 games, 2.2 points per game. When Tim Payne does not start, the Phoenix have 8 points from 11 games, 0.7 points per game. So, rather significant difference there. Callan Elliott's doing perfectly well at right back. He seems to have won the position ahead of Louis Fenton as well, so fair play to him. However, neither of those players offer you as much going forward and in defense, like the full package as Tim Payne, so I think that's arguably an even bigger blow than losing Gary Hooper, which is a pretty significant blow in itself. But at least they still have, like, De Vere, David Ball, they still have import caliber players in attack that can fill some of that gap. Damages their bench very significantly, but so it goes. Yeah, it's a little bit of a concern because it's starting to feel like a lot of the things that, like, just little things continue to go against the Phoenix throughout this whole restart process, and it's tricky to balance that with the competing for a title whole thing. And they've slipped to third. They could slip as low as fourth. It all depends on how Western United go on Wednesday evening, which also depends on who they might play in the next round as well, like for the elimination final. We were working this out before we recorded. Did you write it down? Because I'm going to forget it if I try to think about it.
I did not. I actually couldn't figure it out myself. I was trying to keep up with you and I got nowhere. So
Okay.
I just know they're either going to play the Brisbane or they're either going to play Brisbane or Perth, and you wanted them to play Perth. So
Yeah, Western United play Melbourne City, it is, on Wednesday night. And if Western United win that game, they go ahead of the Phoenix, which would knock the Phoenix down to fourth, which would knock Brisbane to fifth, which would mean Welligtonn Phoenix versus Brisbane, yeah. So if Western United draw or lose against Melbourne City, they'll either stay fifth or rise up to fourth, but not affect the Phoenix, which would mean the Phoenix play sixth place Perth Glory. So, yeah, what did I say? If Western United win, the Phoenix play Brisbane Raw. If Western United draw or lose, the Phoenix play Perth Glory. There we go. We got it all sorted out. They've played both those teams since the restart. They drew 1-1 with Brisbane in a game that they dominated but couldn't score the goals they deserved to. And they beat Perth in that 2-1 game I mentioned earlier. They had lost to Perth both times they played them earlier in the season. However, Perth don't currently have noted Phoenix killer Diego Castro. They're a bit weakened on the old post-lockdown thingamajiggy, and if I scrape down further down this thing, I can say they have won 2 games and lost 4 games of their 6 games post-restart, so they have not been in great form themselves, Perth. So I think that's probably is the preferable matchup, but I don't know that Brisbane's a terrible one either, because they've played alright against Brisbane every time they've played them, to be honest. They did lose to them to snap their 9-game unbeaten streak early in the season, but that was sort of an unexpectedly poor Phoenix. They're better than that. They have been better than that most times. Even throughout this restart, like, it's a point I've already made once, but they really haven't played terribly. They just need to figure out how to make their dominance count at the times when they are in the ascendancy in games. So yeah, I don't think either of those are terrible matchups. Brisbane have played 4 games since the restart, 1-1, drawn 2, lost 1, so they're not doing fantastic either. Western United are borderline the form team, and I don't know. I mean, as the form team, you wouldn't really want to play them. They can't play them now because Western United have beaten Sydney, which is unfortunate because I would have quite liked to see, even though they have been playing very well, there is that little bit of a rivalry between Western United and Welligtonn Phoenix through Mark Rudan and a couple signings. And it's a manufactured rivalry, but at the same time, the Phoenix, I would say 2 of their 3 absolute best performances this season have been against Western United, potentially even their 2 best performances. So they, for whatever reason, have risen to the occasion when they play them. But yeah, because of results over the weekend, they can't actually face Western United until the grand final at the earliest. So I tell you what, it'd be a hell of a grand final, but there's a long way to get to that possibility at the moment. But yeah, just gotta hope that the Phoenix can turn it around when it matters in playoff football, because that's the only avenue at this point. That's the gig. That's what they got to do. So I don't have a problem with whether they face. I would prefer Perth, but I don't think Brisbane are a bad matchup either. So I think the Phoenix should still, despite everything, be favourites going into that, and you just got to wipe the slate clean from the restart before it, and the players who are missing, ignore those things, and just go out there and win a football game, right? Worry about everything else when it comes.
Just got to go out there and get the job done. Like this episode of the Nichecast. It's all done. All finished. And we'll be back next week with even more Kiwi sport. Holy cow. We're going to have the Caribbean Premier League fired up. Lydia Ko's got another tournament coming up. Stephen Adams got his NBA playoffs. We've got NRL footy going on. The Welligtonn Phoenix playoff final situation's going to be there. Busy times, and it's beautiful times to be a Kiwi sports fan. Stay in touch. Don't be a stranger. And just enjoy the land of Aotearoa. Rain, hail, or beautiful sunshine. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Till next time. Cha-cha.